you go?
I put them in a break room.
Oh.
Took me a second. I'll bring them back.
Okay.
A couple years of Zoom teaching, I've got this down at this point. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Hey, we can hear you perfectly. You have a little bit of a view from that camera. There's a pretty full house here. I have some brief introductions, and I'll introduce both of you in just a second. I'm delighted everybody's come and found the food and coffee in the back. I would further invite you to continue to eat the food. Let's make it all go away. And if you're not familiar with campus, the restrooms are just down the hall, and I encourage you to take care of your personal needs as necessary. I want to begin with a land acknowledgement, as all events do here at UAS. So our campus resides, and I'm not sure where to look here. This is a little confusing, this hybrid event. Our campus resides on the unceded territories of the Occoquan on Tlingit Ani, also known as Juneau, Alaska. We acknowledge that the Tlingit people have been stewards of the land on which we work and reside since time immemorial, and we are grateful for that stewardship and incredible care. We also recognize that our campus is adjacent to the ancestral home of the Haida and Tsimshian, and we commit to serving their peoples with equity and care. We recognize that the series of unjust actions that attempted to remove them from their land, which includes forced relocations and the burning of villages. We honor the relationships that exist between the Tlingit, the Haida, and the Tsimshian peoples, and their sovereign relationships to their lands, their languages, their ancestors, and future generations. We aspire to work toward healing and liberation, recognizing our paths are intertwined in the complex histories of colonization here in Alaska, and I think as we'll hear today, the world over. We acknowledge that we have arrived here by listening to the people's, elders, lessons from the past, and these stories carry us as we weave a healthier world for future generations. I think that's a perfect way to launch into an event that is attempting to do that across the globe, not just in our home here in Juneau or on Tlingit Ani. So we're here to listen, to learn, and to share some stories. And my name is Kevin Maier. I'm a professor of English here at the university. And I was honored to be asked by my colleague, Whit here, who has been hosting this month-long event. And I'll ask that you sort of step into the frame here and pitch the next couple of events here before we dive into our event for today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So thank you all for being here today. I am very happy for this turnout. So this event is part of the series of events related to the Waging Peace exhibit that you will see in the next room and the room, the main library space. So for, after this event, we have another one on Saturday at noon. It's the screening of the documentary Sir No Sir, and then we will have an opportunity to talk to the director of the film, and of course eat good food that day. And then on October the 8th, there will be a symposium. I'm sorry, December. Thank you, my brain. December the 8th, around the same time, there will be a symposium where we will present the prizes to the students who won the student contest. There will be food, good people, good conversation, so please join us in the next two events as well. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. So I will, at this point, I'll introduce our honored guests who are zooming in. And I'll introduce them in turn, and I'll turn the floor over to you in just a second. I would ask that we hold our questions until the conclusion. There'll be an opportunity at that point for you to ask questions of our guests and also to share your own stories. And the broader sort of goal here is to think about the role of art and poetry in particular in addressing historical trauma. So our first guest on the right there is Doug Rawlings, who hails from Rochester, New York. He's zooming in from Maine today. But he completed a bachelor's degree in economics in 1968, and shortly thereafter was drafted, spent 411 days in Vietnam at the height of American involvement there. Upon his return to the United States in 1969, he went back to school to study literature, completed a master's in teaching degree in Boston, Taught high school briefly and then landed a teaching gig at the University of Maine at Farmington. Taught there for 27 years and has been retired, although I think it sounds like a soft retirement. As we overheard you talking about teaching there, and he continues to be active in Veterans for Peace, an organization that he co-founded, and he continues to teach a class in peace studies. And I guess in his spare time he writes, especially poetry, and we'll hear quite a bit about that today. So thanks for joining us, Doug. Our second guest on the left-hand corner there is Teresa Mei Chuc, and she was born in Saigon, Vietnam. And Teresa fled her Vietnamese homeland with her mother and brother shortly after the American War in Vietnam. Teresa served as the Altadena Poet Laureate from 2018 to 2020 and has collaborated with Doug to publish Bamboo Bridge, Conversations Between a Vietnamese Boat Refugee and an American Vietnam veteran of the Vietnam War. She has a new chapbook. Oh, there's the book there. Great, thank you. She has a new chapbook coming out this spring. It's entitled Incidental Takes, and she teaches literature and writing at a public high school in Los Angeles. I presume slightly different weather in both Maine and Los Angeles to what we have. Just so you are aware, there are about, I'd say 25, I'm not going to count, but 25 of us, a mix of kind of students, community members, and faculty. And yeah, we're delighted to have you here, and I'll ask that everyone here join me in welcoming you to Juneau virtually. So, and then I'll turn it over to you, both of you.
Doug, would you like to begin with your introduction?
Sure. Can you hear me? Am I coming through?
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, and Kevin, for this invitation. An honor to be here. I would just toss out my usual disclaimer, which is that I do not pretend to represent all Vietnam veterans. There were 3 million of us. And I had a particular experience at a particular time at a particular place, and I've written about that, and so I express my point of view from that perspective. We started this whole thing because I'm the poetry editor of a publication called Peace and Planet News, which comes out of Veterans for Peace, and I came across Teresa's poem. And wow, I loved it. I looked at more of them, and we started talking back and forth. And eventually we were sharing poems, and then we just decided that we would collaborate in this book. So a perspective from a person who was a veteran of the American Army in Vietnam before Teresa was born. And then Teresa as a Vietnamese boat refugee as well. So we've got this discussion that we think we can add something to the conversation about that war. So. Here's my brief introduction. That's somewhat brief, I guess. So once again, I'm honored to join Teresa Mei Chuc in a collaborative read from our collection of poems, entitled Cầu Tre, Bamboo Bridge. I'm also honored to participate in Ron Carver's ongoing efforts to acknowledge the importance of the GI resistance movement in bringing the American War in Vietnam to a close. The year 2023 is the 50th anniversary of the United States' withdrawal from that disastrous war. It's fitting that we bring our stories back into our country's collective consciousness as a way to warn against waging war once again for the profit of the war industry. Many of us see the current war in Ukraine as just that, an unfortunate prelude to a replaying of the war we were immersed in 50-odd years ago. There are many ways to resist war through the arts, including through the use of poetry. Many Vietnam veterans have found poetry to be especially useful, not just as a therapeutic tool, but also as a way to accurately reflect the surreal nature of our experiences. Being immersed in a guerrilla war does not easily lend itself to a straight narrative, recounting events through definable beginnings, middles, and ends. Poetry gives us a medium to capture the staggering jolts of consciousness that wove their way through our daily lives as participants in such a war. But not all war poetry that attempts to resist the war mentality embracing this nation has to come solely from our actual war experiences. Equally powerful are poems that attempt to reflect upon our lives as we grapple with the effects of war on our children, parents, grandchildren, and the natural environment. This urge to communicate the complexities of being a veteran and also a veteran against war and for peace provides the foundation for these poems I've selected for today's reading. But also, more importantly, I've chosen them as a means to accompany the powerful poems that Teresa Mei Chuc has written. Her willingness to work with me through our poems has proven to be life-changing for me. Our hope is that our poetic dialogue will help others understand the devastating effect that war has on all of us, and to reinforce our efforts to abolish war forever. And what we're going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Teresa now, and then she's going to read a poem, and then I'll read a poem. Oops. Am I off the screen here? Hello. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we hear you and see you just
Yes.
fine.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything here. So, Teresa, go for it. I'll try to get back. I'm not seeing anything on my screen.
I see you on the screen, Doug.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll give a brief introduction as well. I'm so honored once again to join Doug Rawlings in our collaborative reading from our collection of poems entitled Cầu Tre, Bamboo Bridge. I was born in Saigon, Vietnam, and fled my Vietnamese homeland with my mother and brother shortly after the American War in Vietnam, spending 3.5 months in a freight boat stranded in the South China Sea before being rescued. My father, who had served in the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, remained in a Viet Cong re-education prison camp for 9 years. And as a result of that, he experienced severe PTSD. I needed to engage in the process of healing, forgiving, and compassion in order to break the cycle of violence that continued to haunt and affect me and my relationships. I did not want to pass down the trauma of war to my children. I realized that when I heal, I not only help my children to heal, but I also help my parents to heal. I believe that poetry is a means to touch the human heart and soul, where compassion could take root and transformation could happen. And I've seen my relationship with my parents actually heal and grow stronger as I work on this process of healing myself. If we could see humanity in each other, healing could take place. It is an act of voicing our humanity and an act of listening, an act of reciprocity. By joining American veteran Doug Rawlings in this poetic conversation between boat refugee and war veteran, I gained a deeper and more profound understanding of the experiences of American veterans, as well as my own father, who was a Vietnamese veteran during the war, and saw our similarities through the resonances in our poems as we both work towards healing from the traumas of war and work towards a more peaceful world. Now I'll read my poem. These poems are based on true stories. Immigration. It is October when the winds of autumn blow strong in the Pacific. There are over 2,000 of us, sardines, barely human and starving. We sleep on the floor and wash ourselves with seawater. People are sick. When someone dies from sickness, she or he is wrapped in a blanket and tossed overboard during a Buddhist chant. I was only 2 years old and cannot recollect the dying next to me, nor can I recollect my constant coughing, nor can I recall seeing my mother's worried countenance as she contemplated our future, how my constant crying made her want to jump overboard.
Thank you, Teresa. My poem is entitled You Should Write About It. I was in Vietnam from July of 1969 to August of 1970 in the Central Highlands. I was with the 715th Artillery attached to the 173rd Airborne. This poem makes references to 175s and 8-inchers, which are the howitzers that we use to provide support for the 173rd. You should write about it. You should write a book about it. Like that time you held that hand, or when the stars burst into flares, or how about when the earth flew away before your eyes? And how about that smell? Maybe you should write a manual detailing how to burn your shit in diesel fuel before breakfast. Or maybe you could write a song about the 175s and the 8-inchers blowing away your eardrums. Or perhaps a poem to the girls and their wooden faces making love to the moon bouncing behind your shoulder. Well, how about it? It's been a while. I know you still got it. You write something, anything, God damn you. It won't kill you, you know. At least not any more than it already has.
Thank you, Doug. Cockroaches. A proposal by someone to my mom after the Vietnam War. Why don't you sell your baby? You don't have anything to eat. A response by my 4-year-old brother. No, don't sell my sister. There are lots of cockroaches for us to eat. When I returned to the country 18 years later, I saw them. Large, brown, shiny tanks on the wall. Evidence of my brother's love for me.
Thank you, Teresa. This poem's entitled Bicentennial Poem, Autumn 1976. I wrote it in Bath, Maine. My daughter, Jennifer, is 2 now and can almost speak in complete sentences. Why, if this were 7 years ago, she Vietnamese, she would almost be old enough to sell her mother.
When I first saw Daddy, he was like an Egyptian cat, skinny, foraging, and stern, just released from a Viet Cong prison. He told us he hated the color red. 16 years later, he wears a red sweatshirt and smiles. The pin tip opening in his heart enough to let in a driblet of red.
PTSD remedies. First off, drop the P. There's nothing post about a mirror that threatens to slit your wrist. But keep the D. I'll take disorder, sweet chaos, anytime over the close order drill that haunts my early morning hours. Then let the healing begin. 1, ask yourself, who am I? 2, ask your lover, who are you? 3, remain still. Wait for he or she to whisper, who are we? Now the ache has permission to leave, and the sunrise can ease you into another day.
Thank you, Doug. This next poem is called Agent Blue. A lot of people have heard of Agent Orange, but there were a rainbow of chemicals used during the war, and Agent Blue had a purpose to destroy the food supply. And this poem is also about PTSD. Agent Blue. To kill correctly takes calculation, down to a science. Arsenic, cacodyllic acid, no water and rice on a cellular level. Make sure no surviving seed can be collected and planted, because even a small seed assures survival. Because mortars, grenades, and bombs cannot destroy a grain. Because our heart is made of seeds. Know what it takes to kill the seeds. Know what it takes to deprive the plant of water, to dehydrate it, to be surrounded by love but unable to absorb it.
I've done some work for a few years in the psychiatric ward at our Togus, our VA hospital, and that poem really strikes home. So thank you. This poem is entitled Low Intensity Warfare, and I wrote it in 85 or 86 when we first formed Veterans for Peace, because we were concerned about what was happening in Central America as being a replication of the Vietnam War. In it, I refer to Willie Peter, which is Army slang for white phosphorus, which was also a horrible thing that was used in that war. low-intensity warfare. Up here, we're working up this winter's wood. Down there below the Rio, below the Durangos and the fruit section of our global IGA, deep in the sweet underbelly of America, down there, we're stacking up bodies. Up here, the mornings are crisp and clear, the leaves die beautifully, eating earth browns, translucent yellows, blood reds. Up here, fall is in the air. Down there, young peasants are slipping into puddles of mangled skin. Down there, Willie Peter is hard at work. Down there, the morning air smells of burning flesh. Up here, business is as usual.
Often, we don't usually hear about war's impact on the land, the plants, the animals, the water. And I really wanted to show that in this poem. The decade the rainforest died, the deer did not stop running. Leopards climbed into trees that could not hide them. The Duglenker and the white-cheeked gibbon cursed at the metal gods we flew, raining on them as they burned from napalm. Elephants choked on the smoke of gunpowder and poison. Their steps, a strange rhythm, as they tried to fly. The thunder of bombs echoed the steps of elephants. Tigers exploded as they stepped onto landmines. In a forest covered with leaves dead from Agent Orange, fallen trees, and decomposing bodies of animals and people, the earthworms were washed away in monsoons with soil that could no longer grab onto roots. The Javan rhinoceros and the wild water buffaloes that were still alive wandered aimlessly. Wary with M16s and AK-47s, we marched quietly and steadily, not knowing why we were killing each other. I have a footnote to this poem. For 10 years, the U.S. Air Force flew nearly 20,000 herbicide spray missions in order to destroy the forest cover, as well as agricultural lands in key areas of southern Vietnam.
Thank you, Teresa. As I mentioned before, I was in the Central Highlands and saw some of that. We started Veterans for Peace in 1985, 5 of us here in Maine, and we have 130 chapters now across the United States and also in Alaska, and 6 international chapters, including one in Hanoi, Vietnam, which we've had there for a long time, and their work is mostly under the project they call Renew, which is to remove unexploded ordnance from rice paddies. 50 years after this war has taken place, there are still little kids being killed by our bombs, which they stumble upon in the rice paddies. And so what Project Renew does, they work with Vietnamese people, American expatriates, if you will, to explode those bombs before the kids get to them. So this poem is entitled Unexploded Ordnance, and it's written for Chuck Searcy, the person who leads that program in Vietnam, and the Vietnamese, thousands of Vietnamese who are working to help him undo what we have done. Unexploded ordnance. So I was maybe all of 21 when they whipped me into some kind of soulless shape. Yet another one of America's weeping mother's sons sent forth into this world to raise, pillage, and rape. And now it's coming on to another Christmas Eve, and songs of joy and peace fill up our little town. How, I ask myself, could I possibly believe I could do what I did and not reap what I had sown? And that land far away from what I call home, a grandfather leads his granddaughter by the hand into a field where we did what had to be done. They trip into a searing heat, brighter than 1,000 suns.
Thank you, Doug. In 2015, I returned to Vietnam. I spent a few weeks there, and I visited my birth city, Saigon, and the Peace Village, where children who are affected by Agent Orange live. and there's an ICU unit there, so there's still babies being born affected with the effects of Agent Orange. And this poem is called Agent Orange. It's difficult to be alone without a mother's touch in a crib like a baby, except one is not. A son taught to live with a thirst for a mother who loves her child, though one of his legs is too short, the other too long. He sits, arms bent and limp, but do not avoid him. He wants to interact. His swollen eyes and misshapen head leans back. In a dream, mother holds him close, as if by her embrace alone, she will somehow right the wrong. The chemical traveled through her placenta to the womb where small limbs that needed to form couldn't, where the tiny body the size of a fist no longer knew what to do. It was named for the orange band around each 55-gallon drum, orange as a sunrise that permeates one's soul, how its rays cover the sky and the earth with a deep orange, rising as those bodies also rise.
This next poem's entitled Prometheus Again, and I have a sort of a love affair going on with the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, that they really knew how to punish people. Narcissus and Sisyphus and Prometheus, who was this titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humankind, and of course the gods did not like that so much. And so his punishment was to be tied to a mountaintop for eternity and have buzzards or vultures or whatever tear apart his guts as he felt all the pain of that, and then have it heal again over the night, and then have these buzzards show back up again to tear him apart once again for eternity. The idea of this poem came from like as I mentioned, I was with the 715th Artillery, and when the 173rd guys got into some trouble and they needed some help from us, they would just say, "Can you bring some fire down on coordinates such and such and such and such?" I also make some reference here to, I'm sure students do not know what these refer to, but I refer to Ripple, Muscatel, and Thunderbird. I hope you never encountered them, but they were the rot-gut wine that we used to drink to get ourselves stupidly drunk and then stupidly sick. So there's reference in the poem to that as well. This is called Prometheus Again. To the men of the 715th Artillery, Bong Son, Vietnam. We once brought fire down on some village children in that latest crazy forgotten war of ours. And now we've come home to spend our days asleep on park benches beneath corporate newspapers of indifference. And our nights chained to their trash cans, drunk on their Ripple, Muscatel, Thunderbird, retching our guts up into their blind and relentless dawn.
Tonga on counter-recruitment at my high school. We scoop buckets of water out of the boat where the ocean is leaking in from a hole. The U.S. military preys on kids in poor neighborhoods. I show my students photos of Agent Orange victims, hoping to save them with truth from the war machine.
Thank you, Teresa. That inspired me to write this particular poem. I wrote this poem, and I'll read it now. This poem was written in 2003. It's entitled Counter-Recruitment Work at Mount Blue High School, which is the local high school in my area where both of my kids went to school. And we used to set up Veterans for Peace. We used to set up tables next to recruiters on job days, right? And there were some very interesting conversations that took place, trust me, about that. And we actually ended up referring to ourselves more as full disclosure as opposed to counter-recruitment, because we wanted young people to understand as much as possible what they would be getting into if they joined the military. And we are, by the way, not opposed to the military. We're just opposed to the way it's been used. So this was Counter-Recruitment Work, Mount Blue High School, 2003, the Iraq War. We face off. The recruiter, some Hispanic kid in camis from the Bronx, stuck up here in this very white farming town. Me, paunchy, balding, weary-eyed, 3 decades removed from my own war. Both of us homing in on these high school kids, not slick enough to get out of town on their own. He needs them to make rank. I need them to help me stay sane. God, if you're still around, damn this fucking war. Our last poem. Now, I think we turn the tables over to you folks and see if you want to ask us any questions or comments would be much appreciated.
Well, thank you so much. I think this is an appropriate. I'll turn my screen around here so you can hopefully see the crowd that has gathered.
It has to be like 30-something.
Yeah,
now.
It's grown since we started there, and I apologize you can't see my face now, but yeah, this is a great opportunity for the audience to ask questions and or offer commentary on the poetry there. And I think if you want to raise your hand, please just stand up and go ahead. Yeah.
Here. Gloria, does this work?
I can speak
Microphone?
loudly.
Yeah.
They should be able to hear without the microphone.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Can they
Yes.
hear me? Okay.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Thank you. First off, thank you for coming and presenting. It was really great to hear your poetry. I do have one critique to start off before I ask my questions. I think if you two continue to present your poetry, maybe provide a time for us to sit with it, because I felt like hearing the poems back to back was kind of a lot, and it brought up a lot of emotions for me. And it just felt like it was just an intense 30 minutes. But maybe that's what you want, at which point, great, good job. My first question is to, and I'm sorry I don't know your name, the woman from Teresa. So my first question is for Teresa, and this is kind of it's a little personal, but my question is, to be Vietnamese and to be living in America and to also have like your family be in America is like, I guess as you have gotten older and you matured, when did you realize like the impact of that situation where here you are, you left your home country and now you are living in the country that forced you out of your home? Could you talk about that? You don't have to if it's too personal.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think I realized it shortly after we moved here because the way I was dressed, I would wear kind of like pajamas, and we were very, and the food that I would bring to school, the kids would, comment on the scent. But mostly what made me realize at a very young age when I came, I think around maybe probably 4 or 5 years old, was that I didn't have a father. And I would see my classmates' fathers come pick them up, hold them in their arms, and I wondered where my father was. And my mom would tell me he's in prison, he's in Vietnam. And so I had to grapple with that at a very young age, though I couldn't really understand why he was not here. But I just had a feeling, I knew we were from somewhere else, and my dad was still there, and we're here. And when at home, I was raised in, I'm mixed Vietnamese, Cantonese, so I was raised in my Vietnamese, Cantonese culture, and those were my first two languages. So I always felt that I was in between cultures, and living here, kind of not really belonging. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. But yeah, thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
I have a second one that's for the both of you. Is when did you discover poetry as a means for healing for what you were going through? And since maybe Doug could start, since you
Sure.
talked last.
Mid-October 1970.
Oh,
How's that for a
That's a
specific
specific answer.
And it's actually quite accurate. I was, as mentioned before, I was drafted out of Ohio State. I was an economics major working on my MBA. I had no interest in poetry at all. I had some experience with it a little bit because I had a good liberal arts education, but still. But it was after that experience, and I came out of that war really confused, didn't know what I wanted to do. And the woman to whom I've been married for the last 52 years, she met me in San Francisco, and we hitchhiked across the United States for 3 weeks before I even got home. And then we decided to move to Boston, and I got a job in a Coast Guard hospital, counting out pills and stuff like that, and we were just hanging around. And Boston in the 70s was really quite a hotbed of activism. And I stumbled into this bookstore in Harvard Square. Some night, this was when bookstores, by the way, were open all night long, by the way. And I found this copy of poems by Denise Levertov, based on her experiences of going to Vietnam, North Vietnam as a peace activist. And I just picked up this book and I just looked at them, and these poems just worked, resonated with me. And I just said, wow, this is it. And so from that point on, I started reading a lot of poetry, beginning to write my own, sharing it with others, and it sort of started there. And I've got five books out now, I think. My latest book has been translated into French, so it's getting some reviews over there as well. So that's kind of where it started for me.
Thank you, Doug. Well, English was my third language, and I really struggled with the language. I was in ESL when I started school, from preschool to third grade. I think third grade was when I started going into the regular classes. And I had so much difficulty with English and expressing myself in English. When I discovered poetry, I was reading like E.E. Cummings, Emily Dickinson, well, especially E.E. Cummings. I think reading his work, and just, he kind of broke all the rules, and it made me realize, wow, it's okay. It's okay that I'm not great at English grammar. It's okay that I don't know, exactly when I need to capitalize or have all my punctuation perfectly in place, because E.E. Cummings doesn't do it, and he can express himself. And so that's when I realized that, wow, this is a way I can actually feel like English is also mine, that is also my language, and I can write it in a way that I don't need to follow all these rules, that I just need to express myself and find my own way of expressing myself.
To piggyback on that, I made reference to capturing the surreal nature of being a Vietnam veteran, I think. That first poem I read about my daughter, a very quick one, and said, gee, my daughter's 2 years old, blah, 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 and she could almost old enough to sell her mother. Boom, done deal, all right? And that got across, for me anyways, one of the most horrific things I discovered when I came back and had my own children, how we destroy the childhood of these peasants. These people were living just this comfortable life, and we came in and we just totally destroyed it. And literally, the little kids would come up to the barbed wire, and they would sell us dope, they would sell us prostitutes, they would do all of that stuff. And you look in their eyes, and they were like maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, and they were just, their eyes were just as cold as ice. And when I had my own kids, I realized, oh my God, what we did to those kids. So I think poetry, I couldn't have written that into a short story or into an essay, but I plunked it into a poem.
Yeah, and I wanted to add also that I had a lot to process, a lot of trauma, because my dad, when he came back, when I first met him was when I was 9 years old, and he was not the dad that I had expected. He wasn't the dad that lifted me up, that smiled, that held me in his arms. Our first dinner together, literally our first dinner together, he said to me, I'm left-handed. He said, you can't use your left hand to eat or write anymore, or I will punish you and I will not love you. And I was just shocked. So there was a lot of processing I had to do for a long time. I wasn't using poetry as this as much as I began to use as a healing tool, until I realized that I'm not processing the trauma that I have, and I was carrying a lot of it in my body. Because I think we have muscle memory and anxiety. And what happens, I think, is violence repeats itself. The cycle of violence, either you are passing it on or you're allowing it on yourself. Because I didn't have a normal relationship with my dad. I didn't really understand what a loving relationship was. And so I think the point when I realized, like, wow, I have a lot to process. I need to separate this from my body. So that's when I just sat down and I just wrote it all down. And it's in this creative nonfiction piece called Year of the Hare. The original title was Demons, because I thought I need to just let all my demons out onto paper so I could just separate it from my body. Because I think with trauma, a part of us wants to hold on to it because it makes us who we are, so we don't want to forget it, but it's not healthy, and it wasn't helping me. So by separating it from my body, I didn't have to forget it, but I didn't have to carry it in my muscles neither, so in my heart. And that allowed me to kind of live again, to not let, to reimagine my life, to heal from the trauma. And it was very violent, so I haven't said any details, but my father threw a knife at me when he caught me using my left hand, and I was doing my homework, and things like he chased me with an axe saying he's gonna kill me because I didn't clean the dishes well enough, so things like that. And that was part of his PTSD. And I realized I needed to forgive him in order for me to heal. And part of the writing is we can process it, and we can read how we want to. I wanted to approach our stories with compassion. I wanted to understand what my father went through with compassion. And so that allowed me to create the memory that in a compassionate way. And I think that helped me to heal.
When I do the work up in the psychiatric ward at our VA hospital, I would first of all, it's a serious lockdown place, right? In fact, one of the nurses took me aside the first day I was there and said, "Doug, you can't put staples in the paper that you bring into these sessions." Whoa, holy crow! Serious lockdown. Many of them were suicidal, trying to dry out from drugs and whatnot. And what I would use poetry from the Civil War right up through the Iraq War, written by veterans, right? And what I tell the patients is, let's see if we can take a look at these things and take them apart. And then they themselves were keeping therapeutic journals. And I said, why don't you try to work on grabbing something from your therapeutic journals and try to transform it into a poem, because then it becomes this artifact that we can put on the table and talk about that poem. We're not talking about you, we're not talking about your therapy, we're talking about this poem. Okay, does it work or doesn't it work, right? And that proved to be quite useful and quite effective. And we got some very good discussions going along those lines. In fact, the nurses told me they were writing poems to get themselves to sleep and stuff like that. So, and the other thing, and I'm totally in agreement with Teresa on this whole thing, is we would talk about compartmentalizing our experiences. We can never forget them, right? We had Afghan, Iraq War veterans, Vietnam veterans in these discussion groups. And we agreed that we can't forget them, but what we can do is put them into some place. And so we could use them as opposed to them using us, essentially, is where we got. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the best method for questions is to, I think they can hear us quite well with the microphone, so maybe just raise your hand or stand if you have a question. Please.
So, you have very different experiences, but similar in the way that you both experienced trauma. And so what was it like for you both to work together and hear each other's experience of the war? Could you hear me?
A simplistic response, which I'm pretty good at, you know, I was the, although of course I suffered some trauma, I'll admit to that, but I was more the agent of it than the receptor of it. And Teresa was, I think, more the receptor of it than the agent of it. And for us, they correspond back and forth. As I mentioned before, Teresa's my daughter's age, right? You know, and I realized many years later, this is called moral injury, by the way, there's a term for it, which I think is very effective. I realized years later what I had done to the Vietnamese people, and it just caused me great anguish and great remorse. And I'm going back, by the way, to Vietnam next year as a part of the journey with my son and my daughter. But you know, I'm trying to grapple with that trauma that I caused others, right? And I was trying to keep my kids from actually experiencing. So that's my side of it. And I'm just hearing Teresa's side of it just makes it so much better for me to grapple with it.
Thank you, Doug. And I think same for me. I grew up watching movies like Apocalypse Now, Ramble, and you know, part of me, it stereotypes veterans, because when I hear Doug's stories and realize he was a child, he was just barely 18 when he was sent to war to kill people. It wasn't his fault in that way, and it allowed me to understand and be more compassionate. And hearing Doug's stories through his poetry, really sincere and heartfelt, you see the humanity and how the pain that he goes through or went through from the experience, and how the war affected both of us. None of us chose it. So and I think having an opportunity to sit down and hear each other's stories and to sincerely exchange stories and helps us build bridges. And I think that's why our collaborative book is called Bamboo Bridge, because I think we need more of that in our world.
I have to correct you, Teresa. I was 22 when I was in Vietnam. I was 18. And which makes it worse for me, because I was, you know, as I mentioned before, I graduated from college. And when I got drafted, you know, my parents were from Canada. I could have gone to Canada. And my three brothers were all in the National Guard. I could have gone in the National Guard.
You were still very young.
Yeah, I know.
22.
Still, but it's tougher for me because, you know, I had the mindset, no reference to college students here, but I saw it myself I characterized myself as a typical college punk, right? I was interested in getting drunk and, you know, having a good time, getting my studies done, of course, naturally enough, but it was more self-centered. And when I got into basic training, I said, these guys aren't going to get me, right? Because I'm so smart, you know, and by the time 8 weeks of basic training was over with, they had me. And I was an expert on the M14 rifle. I knew how to kill somebody with my bare hands. I was in the best physical condition I'd ever been in my life, right? They got me, right? And it's not like I ended up being this racist psychopath when I got to Vietnam, but I was caught up in this whole thing. And it took me a while to work through it. And the other thing is that, you know, what I like to say is most of us were nice guys, right? Most of us, but not all of us. And I had never in my privileged career, I like to say that I am the most privileged species ever to exist on this planet, right? A white male raised in the 1950s in suburbia, right? I'd never experienced anything like rubbing shoulders with some of these guys who were sociopaths, who took real pleasure in hurting other human beings, right? And part of what we call moral injury is that the idea that you were with these people and you didn't stop them from doing what they did. I wasn't necessarily a perpetrator of some of the things these guys did, but I didn't stop them. And so that causes a lot of anguish.
Thank you, Doug. Yeah, I think just hearing your thoughts and feelings and experiences, that's important. I think instead of just stereotyping or like you said, you know, every veteran is different, and you're speaking your experience and your healing journey, and that in itself is something very courageous and beautiful. I think that you not only are going through the individual journey, but with Veterans for Peace too, you advocate and you continue to advocate for peace.
This is turning into a therapeutic session for us, which is what the discussion in poetry does, right? I mean, one of the things I like to say about poetry is that if you're really into the arts, you make yourself vulnerable. Right? It starts in a very personal place. No matter what your art form is, it starts very personal. And when you open it up to the public, right, you're opening yourself up. I think our culture doesn't encourage that as much as it should. I think that's what the arts do. Say, here I am. Okay, I'm not trying to preach. I'm not trying to do this. Here's how I feel, and this comes through in this poem. So there it is. So yeah.
Well, on that note, I really want to thank both Doug and Teresa for building bamboo bridges.
Good reference.
I can bring a perspective of another Vietnam veteran, my brother, who's deceased. And I'm still trying to heal from that. His sister who loved him dearly. He was that 18-year-old who didn't want to go there. And when he did, he suffered with the work he did. He, maybe if you can see the movie called Hunting in Wartime, it's about Alaska Native veterans who were hunters. I'm sorry, I didn't think I would cry this much, but I do want to thank you for helping me see ways of building bridges to find.
It's very difficult work, and
Yes. Thank you. My brother is deceased, and so he cannot build this bridge himself. But we were very, very close as young children growing up here. His role in our family was to be a hunter, and so of course the trauma that he came home with actually kind of caused a diaspora in my whole family, and I think that's the root of these tears. But I do thank you for sharing some of the ways that Teresa, you, and Doug have found your way to the humanity of it, you know, because it's important work. You know, it would be so wonderful if we could end all wars. I was part of a child of the 70s when, you know, we thought those bomber jet planes would turn into butterflies above our nation. And it's still work. But thank you so much for what you shared. It's deeply heartfelt. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. And I did order the DVD, Hunting in Wartime.
Wow, I just
So
found
I'm looking forward to watching it.
Well, take care of yourself when you watch it. It's very painful, but it's also truth-telling. And, you know, I think it's just eyes wide open when you see that there were so many ways people have been affected, and I respect your ways of finding healing through poetry and keeping your hearts open despite the pain that's in there. So thank you, and thanks for letting me those healing tears.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, I want to reinforce the phrase "for sir, no sir." The documentary that you're going to hopefully all be watching. Just watch that. This is how we dealt with that war, right? When I went into that war, I didn't know what the hell was going on. When I came out of it, I was incredibly angry. I realized I'd been caught into this whole thing, and I saw a lot of veterans, and more Vietnam veterans have killed themselves than were killed in combat. So our suicide rate is through the ceiling, okay? Because a lot of guys turned their hatred inward. They knew what they'd done. People were calling them heroes, and we knew we were not heroes. There were very few heroes that we ever encountered, right? And so a lot of times, unfortunately, our culture forced us to turn our hatred inside. And what Veterans for Peace and organizations like that do, as we talk about it, we get it out there. We share stories, right? And we yell, and we're angry at each other, right? And we'll, you know, our conventions are wonderful experiences of workshops, and, you know, and getting people, and then heading to the bar afterwards, and, you know, and arguing with each other, and then hugging each other. And that's what I think a veteran community really, really does. I hope your brother had an opportunity to be in that kind of community before he died, because it means so much to all of us. So.
As you are waiting for the next question, I just want you to know that there's a packet of poems printed out here by Doug and Teresa, but also some poems by other veterans as well, Vietnam veterans as well. So just so you know, if you're interested in having some of them.
Yeah, and Ron Carver's book that you've got I think you have access to, is now being translated into Vietnamese. And so it's going to be over in Vietnam, and we're going to have a lot more readers, Vietnamese readers, of this book.
Yeah, I would, again, thank you for your comment, Patricia. And the purpose of the event also is to open up a space for sharing, so I really appreciate that as a potential transition. Definitely, if we have more questions for Doug and Teresa, we should continue to ask them. But the idea behind the exhibit is to make present some history and some historical trauma there, and I really appreciate the way you frame that, Doug, the PTSD and sort of crossing it out there, that these historical traumas are present and real, and opening this space at the university and with you and me and you in California, Teresa, it's really an opportunity for all of us to come together and do some sharing and think about the ways that both poetry but also just community can address some of this trauma. So,
I have another question, and this is also directed towards the veterans who are in the room with us today, along with our speakers. What piece of advice, that would you like to share to all of us about your experiences? I know a lot of the times as a faculty member, I always want to give all my students all this words of wisdom that I have, whether or not they listen. But I feel that, the two of you and the veterans who are in this room probably have some things that they would like how would you like us to move forward in life from after what you've experienced?
Make a comment, or are you waiting
Yeah.
for someone from the class?
No, please go ahead, Doug.
I like to equate myself, if I were in your shoes, if I were a first-year student, the equivalent of me coming into your classroom would be a World War veteran coming into my classroom, right? And I'd be thinking to myself, what? 50 years ago? What's this guy got to say about this? And I guess part of what I want to say is, listen to us, okay? You don't have to believe all of it, you don't have to agree with all of it and stuff like that, but at least give, acknowledgement to the fact that these wars happened. And we've got some experience from how those wars began and how they took place and afterwards. And we can share that with you. And then you can take it. Take it wherever you want to do. And like I said, I have friends whose children are in the military right now. They're members of Veterans for Peace, and their kids are in the military. And they support them. Right? And so we're not anti-military. But we just want people to realize what happens when a country goes to war. And as I made reference to at the beginning of this whole thing, I'm really concerned about this Ukraine situation. I see it as a possibility of blowing up and becoming another Vietnam, to tell you the truth. I hope not, but, so.
I want to thank you, Doug and Teresa, for your powerful and very moving poetry. And I guess in answer to your question, I'd say question authority. Just like you
Yes.
said, I was 18 when I got my draft notice and questioned nothing about what was happening and why it was happening. So I also want to thank you, Doug, for starting Veterans for Peace. Because of you, we've had a chapter in Juneau for about 20 years now. And we've done a lot of activities, including counter-recruiting, so I understand your experience in the high schools. We're all getting old. Our chapter isn't able to recruit younger veterans. They're probably the same situation you're in. So
Right.
I guess, like I said, the important thing is for younger people to question authority, to ask why is this being done, and what for, and how can I change what's happening.
Thank you. Wow. Welcome home.
Thank you.
I would do my peace. I teach this course in peace studies, nonviolent direct action at the university, and we would throw a dinner for veterans around Veterans Day, right? And people go, "Well, what? You guys are talking about peace and all that kind of stuff." I said, "Yeah, no. We want to talk to veterans." And I would tell my students, I would say two things. I said, wait for these old guys to show up, all right? Which they did, right? My age, old guys. And I said, the first thing you should do as an 18 or a 19-year-old student is look them in the eye and go, so what was your MOS? You know what an MOS is? Anybody? Military Occupational Special. What was your job? And I said, and it worked. Because this old guy would go, whoa, you know what an MOS is? Yeah. As soon as it was, yes. And then they would say, welcome home. It wouldn't be thank you for your service, which I think it's got its problems. Just welcome home. And we want to listen to you. And then finally, I would say, don't say I can't imagine. Say, I'm trying to imagine what you went through. Please tell me. And I think that's a very effective way of communicating.
Thank you, Doug. I think as a refugee, I think when there are wars, to also pay attention to the refugees that start coming into our country or into different countries, because they are here because they were ripped from their homelands because of the war. So coming from my experience to really try to understand and support them as much as possible, because they don't know the language and they don't know the culture. They're very traumatized already as well. And to listen to their stories as well.
I was in high school during just getting at it. My older brother was in guerrilla warfare boot camp, getting ready to ship out to Vietnam, and our house burned down, and the government gave my brother a humanitarian reassignment. So he didn't go to Vietnam, but he brought some, he actually served here on Adak Island, and when he came back home, he brought some of his Vietnam buddies home with him, and we saw the trauma that they were carrying around inside them. And one man, we went into the bedroom and said, hey, get up, come on, coffee's on. The guy just leapt off the bunk, put my brother in a chokehold, and my brother flew off the bunk and the other bunk and hit him with his whole body and was pounding on him and screaming at him, come back, Sergeant, come back, Sergeant. We're not in Vietnam, we're not in Nam anymore. And they had to be hand-to-hand death combat ready the minute they woke up ready to fight to the death, because it was so traumatic and so just words can't describe really. But we saw, and then when he realized where he was at, so he went out and sat on our back porch, a grown man, battle-hardened soldier, just sobbing, his whole body was just shaking with tears. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. He said, sometimes I just want to kill myself. He said, I'm sorry, you're the most wonderful family. I wish every one of my buddies that survived Nam could get this kind of love and care. The horrible things happen I can't even say out to myself. Babies, women, children, just everything, just nothing we could do. We didn't go there. We didn't do that because we wanted to. We were told either that or, you do it or else. So.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's one of the things I tell people. I said, if you want to, just try to imagine, if you will, that every waking moment you realize that someone was trying to kill you. It wasn't, all of us can die. We can step out of these classrooms and get hit by a truck and stuff like that. But the notion that every waking moment and sleeping moment, as a matter of fact, there was someone out there who really wanted to kill you, not because they hated you individually, but because of what you were, but the uniform you were wearing, what you were doing to the country. And that wires you in a certain way. You just don't walk away from that experience. For me, 13 and a half months of that, I don't walk away from that, without some kind of repercussions, quite frankly. Thank you for
sharing. I'd like to speak just briefly about the war in Ukraine. We're so much more than just bystanders. We're pulling the trigger and firing the missiles through our technology and the incredible amount of help that we're providing. And the trauma that we're creating is unimaginable. And I always think back to John McCutcheon's Christmas in the Trenches. And I wondered if the Russians and the Ukrainians could have an experience like that.
That's a wonderful song. I play it every Christmas. I mean, that's my concern. I see that, connection to the Vietnam War as being, a proxy war. I mean, right now, I think we've got 100,000, 101st Airborne 4 miles in Poland, 4 miles from the border, right? Just there. waiting. And the Vietnam War started, we were advisors, we were helping the Vietnamese and all that kind of stuff, and then all of a sudden it turned into this huge thing for us. And my fear is that that's what's going to happen in Ukraine. They'll bring the draft back. They'll draft women, by the way. They're already working on that, so it's not going to be just for men. And what we had was the 2S deferment when we were in school, which is as long as you maintain a C average or whatever in college, they wouldn't draft you. But now my understanding is the new draft, if it comes into play, was they'll let you complete your semester. But that's it. So I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I've been wrong before. So.
I think I would like to say something about a concept that was mentioned earlier. I don't know if all of you are familiar. I know that the veterans are very familiar with that, but perhaps not all. That is the concept of moral injury. That is very different from a PTSD. I'm just repeating what Susan Schnall, the president of Veterans for Peace and national president for Peace, Veterans for Peace. She said, first of all, she said that the idea of PTSD is problematic. The concept is problematic because we're trying to pathologize what the veterans experienced, made it into an illness, some kind of disease, whereas it was a very normal thing that anyone who went through war would experience. So instead of approaching it, holistically, with community resources to try to help them go through that or recover from that, we relegate that to a medical field. So that is problematic. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't do that at all, but we should think about it that way as well. But then the other concept is moral injury. That is very different. So anyone can have PTSD. So you have a car accident, you're in a car accident, you suffer from childbirth. Any traumatic experience can cause PTSD, but the Vietnam veterans suffered from something that is different. The trauma that they went through also stemmed from what they thought was wrong. So they were doing something really traumatic, but at the same time, a lot of them knew what they were doing was wrong. So apart from PTSD, the normal PTSD that they had, there was also this phenomenon called moral injury that happened inside them. So I can't speak for you, the veterans in the room, but at least I am glad that now we are talking about this, this side, this aspect of your experience. So if you want to comment on that, or if you have anything to share, that would be really appreciated.
I don't know if you're aware of the fact that the whole notion of PTSD came from the work of Judith Herman, who taught at Harvard, and it came from abused women. And what happened during the Vietnam War is more and more soldiers were coming back. Various psychiatrists were looking at that, looking at the veterans and looking at Judith Herman's work and saying, oh my God, this is very similar and stuff. And I agree 100% with your analysis that it's more specific. I mean, moral injury is basically if you witness something or were involved in something that went against your strong moral code and didn't do anything to stop it from happening, you're going to suffer from moral injury. And usually it comes, that whole concept comes from years and years later of reflection upon what you did and what you allowed to have happen. So thank you for making that distinction. I think it's very important.
Doug, you touched on it a little bit. You mentioned, particularly around Veterans Day, people come up and thank you for your service, and it's very awkward. I think it's awkward for you, and it's awkward for me, and it's awkward for probably a lot of veterans because of moral injury. We didn't realize it was because of moral injury, but that's exactly what it's about.
I didn't read it, I guess, maybe. Well, it's a brief poem, I'll read it, and if you wish, but it contains contain some profanities. Are you okay with that? I mean,
We've heard it.
I think we're good.
most of us who came out of the military said one of the more difficult things was stop using the F word every other word, right? Because it was so much part of our language. But I wrote this poem called Walking the Wall, and I was in Washington, D.C. on Veterans Day. By the way, we had this project, we wrote these letters to the wall, the Vietnam Veterans Wall. We wrote 500 letters over a 6-year period of time. We delivered them on Memorial Day to the wall. But I was there on Veterans Day because a buddy of mine who I was in Vietnam with, that was his birthday, and he was also just going through a horrible divorce. And so we met for Veterans Day. And it begins with this note. My time in Vietnam started in early July 1969, wall panel number West 21, and ended in early August 1970, panel West 7, line 29. A walk of about 25 paces past the names of around 9,800 dead. I call this walking the wall. So every time I go to the Vietnam Memorial, that's what I do. I go to that place and I walk that wall. And I look at those names on that wall. And so I was there wearing my Veterans for Peace regalia, my t-shirt and stuff like that. And my buddy was wearing his Vietnam veteran hat. I'm a Vietnam veteran. And all these people would come up to him. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. But it was like saying, hey, how you doing? Thank you for your service. See you later, right? Wait, you want to know what I did? Nobody wants to know that. So this poem comes from that experience. Gotta tell you that you're making me nervous every time you thank me for my service. I know you're trying to be nice and kind, but you are really, truly fucking with my mind. Trust me, it's not that I really care what you think. You have had too much of their Kool-Aid to drink. Trust me, you don't know shit about what service really means. You just need to know that nothing really is as it seems. So take a walk with me down the wall some late evening, where we can all listen to the ghostly young soldiers keening. But don't waste your time thanking them for their service. They might just tell you the truth. All your wars are worthless. So.
Reply to that I learned about moral injury from you because I never heard of that concept before. And I started thinking about my father, and when I interviewed him and things he told me that he did, and it's the same. I'm ashamed that he did those things as part of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. And I actually have a poem that goes with yours from my dad's side. When I visited Vietnam in 2015, I wanted to go to Con Son Island. And Con Son Island was where the French built a series of prisons, including the tiger cages. And those prisons were reopened during the American War in Vietnam. And I wanted to go because my father had told me when he was a captain in the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, he worked in the Ministry of Justice. And one of the things he had to do was he had to sentence Viet Cong, he had to sentence North Vietnamese to the prisons. And those prisons are horrible. I went there and I prayed and I saw so many graves, so many people that died there. Is it okay if I read that poem? It's real short.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Praying at the cemetery on Con Son Island. Endless gravestones, unnamed. A yellow star on each stone lights the night. I try not to breathe in spirits, but I breathe in the smoke of incense. A bat flutters by. A green grasshopper lands by my foot. Someone is saying hello. Perhaps it is a girl who died in a tiger cage. There are not enough incense sticks for all of the graves on Con Son Island. And I offered incense to the people that passed, to pay my respects to them. And knowing my dad's connection to that too.
I'm sorry, Teresa.
I don't know if moral injury could be also passed down, because I feel guilty that my dad did that.
That's why I actually tell some of the students that I work with, I tell them more about my experience than I tell my own children, because I don't want to do that. Also, in reference to the Vietnamese, someone pointed out that, if you've been to the wall in Washington, D.C., to me it's an amazing monument. It's an incredible experience. But if that wall were made for the Vietnamese that were killed there, it would be 9 miles long. Okay, we're looking at American soldiers, 58,381, I think, right now, died in that war. But if we looked at the Vietnamese, the 3 million Vietnamese, that wall would be 9 miles long. The names of all the Vietnamese. And that's what we have to take into account. It's not just what happened to us as soldiers over there. It's what happened to the Vietnamese people as well.
I'd like to make a quick comment about the concept of poetry as a vehicle to heal. I have a book published in 2021, written by Meredith Heller. The name of the book is Write a Poem to Save Your Life. She went through a severe upbringing in Los Angeles and similar places. Very severe. That is, homeless, beaten up and raped before she was 14 years old, prostituting herself to stay alive when she was not yet, she was homeless and not yet 20. And she reached the point where she was directly confronting, should I kill myself? And she read a poem, and it caught her. And she said, I'm going to write a poem about my own feelings of what's happened with me. And she proceeded to do that. And out of that, she really developed a whole procedure for using poetry to heal yourself. And she is now, probably I would guess, in her 40s, and still teaching people in groups and classes. Here's a way to look at yourself that really helps you deal with it, and you write your own poetry. I'm not trying to teach anybody poetry. Write your own. And she's done a remarkable job with it. And the book itself is the procedure for how to do it. Very, very powerful. And the reason I'm bringing it up now is it really connects the depth and power of poetry to articulate how we make sense out of ourselves. And as I recall, George Bernard Shaw said once, we're the species cursed with explaining ourselves to ourselves. Poetry is the most remarkable way to do it. And I urge you to take a look at the book. It isn't a book you read, it's a book you do.
When I worked with patients at the psych ward, I would say, don't refer to poetry as either good or bad. Ask yourself, does it work for you or not? Because it might not work for you, but it might work for somebody else. And I also say, I think it's either Walt Whitman or Robert Frost, one of those guys, who knows, right? Who said, a poem begins in the gut, and it works its way up to the mind, right, and then into the fingers, right? So if it starts in the mind, it's dead in the water. You can't start a good poem from some intellectual exercise. It has to come from some visceral response. And boy, it sounds like what you're talking about there, that's exactly where she's coming from. So, yes, good stuff.
Yeah, I think that may be the perfect place to transition. And I guess I'll return to the land acknowledgement that includes this line that I think that guides so much of the work we're doing at the university, but also just in our day-to-day lives. And that's aspiring to work toward healing and liberation, and recognizing that our paths are intertwined in the complex histories of colonization and of this global kind of issue. And I really want to thank our guests here for helping us walk this walk and do this work today. And we'll offer a warm round of applause. Unfortunately, we can't offer you any of the shrimp or the food in the back of the room, but we'll eat it in your honor and continue having this conversation. So again, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your work with us. And
Thank you.
Yeah, good on cheese.
An honor.
A real honor. Take care of yourselves.
Indeed, you and you as well. Yeah, so please, before you go, I know some students do need to go to class. Before you go, please grab some food if you're able to stay. I would love to keep this conversation going in smaller groups. And thanks everybody for coming out on a snowy afternoon in December. So take good care.
All right.
Thank you.
See ya. Take care of yourselves.
You too, sir.
See you, Teresa. Great being with you again.
So you too. Take care.
Yeah.
Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.
Yes, we shall meet again.